Hey everyone, this is part 2 of our ACH API tutorial series, and in this one I'm going to show you how to append and flatten batches, segment files, and view admin metrics. If you haven't already, I recommend checking out our first video where I cover some basic things like creating, getting, and validating ACH files. You can find a link to that first API video below. So let's get started. The first thing to do is get the service running. We can enter this in quickly. And the first thing that I'm going to demonstrate is how to append a batch to a file that has already been created. Let's first create a file, and we're going to get back our unique ID, so we can copy this because we're going to need it in a second. And I also have a sample batch where I set the ID to 12345 and the company name to YouTube so that we can easily identify it. And we can append this batch to the file we created using curl and xpost dflag and our file name, localhost, port number, files, and then copy in that file ID and then batches. And we can also take a look at this file before appending. So go over to a web browser, and this is what the file looks like initially. Now if we append and refresh, we're going to see that we have this new batch. And it's kind of hard to read, so if we put it in the formatter, you can see a little easier that we do have this batch with the ID and the company name that I specified. One more thing is that since we have a unique ID for this batch, we can specifically get this batch back using that ID. It's pretty similar to grabbing a file. The endpoint's going to look like files, and then our file ID, and then batches, and then our batch ID. And if we do this, we get back this JSON. And it's very similar to the original batch. The only difference is that we have this piece right up here. The next thing I'm going to try is flattening batches. And we can do this if we have multiple batches that have the same batch headers. So we're basically merging all of those entries into one batch header. The sample file that I have has 4 batches, and the first 2 are identical, and then the third and fourth are unique. We can create this file and take a look at it. If we copy this over, I can show you those batch headers. So the only thing that changes between them is that the company name is different. So the first 2 say Wells Fargo, and then the third one says Wells Bank, and the last one says Wells. Ultimately, we're just going to combine these first 2 that say Wells Fargo, and to do that, you can type in curl, and it's going to be post localhost 8080, and then files, and copy in this file ID, and then follow it up with flatten. Now we're going to get a new file ID, and that's because we're creating a new file and not modifying the original. And we can take a look at the new file. It's going to be kind of a mess, but if I just search for batch headers, it should be pretty simple. So you can see that there's 7 batches, and since we're duplicating the file, we're essentially losing 1 batch. And that's because it's getting merged. So this is our Wells Fargo that got merged, and all of those entries have been merged under this single batch. And then we still have our other 2, of course, as well. Another operation that's pretty useful is segmenting files, which basically means we can split a file into 2, separating out debits from credits. I have a mixed debit credit file, and it looks like this. We have 1 debit entry and 2 credit entries. If we segment this, we're going to have 1 file with just the 1 debit, and then another separate file with 2 credits. I'm going to first upload this to the server, and I've done this a bunch of times now, so I'll just speed this up. Let's quickly check to make sure it's up, and we can now segment it. That's going to look like a post command, and then we're just going to do our localhost, now files, and our file ID, followed by segment. We get back 2 unique file IDs, 1 for each file. If we refresh this, we can see those 2 files. I'm not going to copy this into the formatter because it's pretty straightforward, but there's going to be 3 files now, right? The original, the credits one, and then the debits one. Last thing that I want to cover is admin metrics, and this is really simple. We're just going to change the port on a curl to 9090 this time, and then type in metrics. And a lot of this is Go metrics. The one that's most interesting is ACH files created. So since we created that one file earlier, that's going to show up as 1 on the counter. And this isn't going to show up at all if you haven't created any files. We also have one for files deleted. I'm not going to go through that, but if you delete a file, you're going to see that metric too. Okay, so that's pretty much all that there is to cover for our ACH API. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. There's a few operations that I didn't cover, like deletion and custom validation. So if you have any questions about those, just let us know. And also, you can ask anything in our Slack channel where we have a lot of helpful discussion. And there's going to be a link to that channel in the description below too. Thanks for checking out our ACH project, and stay tuned for future tutorials on all of our other open source projects coming up soon.